Comedian and entrepreneur Natasha Pearl Hansen has not really ever done things the normal way. She turned her canceled wedding into a comedy special.
So I did send out the ticket links to everybody instead of save the dates, and then I opened it up to people from my hometown and my high school and sold it out.
She's toured across Europe and produced her own shows, creating her own opportunities.
I cold called a hotel and I was like, I want to come and meet you guys. I'm at the GM, and I pitched a show and they put me on payroll.
She even built a startup from a relationship breakup.
My business is a Breakup Registry, which is a crowdfunding or gift registry platform for people going through breakups.
She has decided to not listen to the advice to go all in on one thing.
It doesn't mean that I can't be a public speaker and a comedian and an entrepreneur. This to me is a portfolio career.
So if you're ready to defy expectations, build stronger and more strategic relationships, and create your own opportunities, you're going to love this conversation with Natasha Pearl Hansen. Natasha Pearl Hansen with us today. Somebody's sitting next to you on an airplane. Let's just picture this. Complete stranger. And they look over at you and they go, "What do you do?" How do you respond to that stranger?
Oh my gosh. You know, I've straight up lied to people just because I, depending on the mood, didn't want to like have the conversation. So I would just say marketing or something, you know. A lot of times I tell people I work in entertainment because I think that's a funny open-ended career path. And sometimes I can tell they just assume that I'm trying to shroud over that I'm like a OnlyFans model or something. And then sometimes they'll get really curious and I'll be like, I'm a comedian. I'm on the way to XYZ. So it's a tough one.
Why do you shy away from it? Is it because people will be like, "What are you in? And press too much?" Or what's the hesitation there?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on the time of the ask, right? Like if it's a 5-hour flight somewhere that I'm going to prepare for and they ask like during takeoff, I'm like, God, I don't want to be hit with jokes the entire flight. Like you just got to feel out somebody's energy, you know?
Right.
And some people don't really bother you. You can just tell sometimes who might. So,
right.
Yeah.
Now, I tell me if I'm wrong on this. You originally went to school for medicine.
Yes, I did.
That right? Tell me a little bit about that story.
You know, I was always really good in school. It was really interesting reflecting back on this, having just turned 40 this week.
Oh, congrats. Happy
Thank
birthday.
you. Yeah, it's wild.
I'm about there too. How does it feel?
No different. I mean, you know, I've always felt like young at heart and an old soul. So age has not really ever mattered to me. All my friends have been all over the spectrum with age. You know, I hang out with really old people. I hang out with 40, 50-year-olds. I hang out with 25-year-olds. So I don't really care. But it does make you reflect. You know, you reflect at decade markers, you know, pretty heavily. But yeah, I was thinking back about college. In high school, I was a really good student. I was straight A's. I aced every exam. I was in all the AP classes, but I was also goofy.
Girl, me and you were sat on different sides, man.
But
me and my struggle bus.
I had friends that were too, and they were like, "Why is this so easy for you?" I'd like straight up show up to pop quizzes in calculus and like ace it in like 10 minutes, and then I would just leave. Wow. But we had a lot of smart kids in our school, and I was friends with a lot of those kids. I was friends with a lot that struggled, but I was also goofy and got along with my teachers well, and I'm still really close with my teachers. Yeah. So the performing side of me was always kind of kept in a separate box. Like theater, I did choir in high school, but I wasn't really part of the theater group, but I was in dance outside of school. So in college, I put my minor as theater and my major was double major in psychology and pre-med. Mm-hmm. And so it was a heavy workload. I just couldn't make up my mind. And I still feel like that. I still feel like I'm both those things.
Well, you said the performer side you kind of kept to the side. And I think I heard another interview, like the theater thing, you were like minored in theater and you wouldn't even kind of admit to that a little bit. Yeah. And the reason I wanted to press into that is I've felt similar over the past few years where I've gotten more interested in storytelling and performance and all of that. But for some reason, for me, I've had to fight a lot of embarrassment is too harsh of a word, but just awkwardness saying
Mm-hmm.
that to people because that seems like something that you do for fun or do it when you're really young,
Right.
you know? And by the time I'm my age, it feels like, you know, I don't believe anybody's ever missed the boat hardly on anything, but
Mm.
that narrative kind of comes up in your mind. So I'm just curious about like, when did you start taking yourself seriously as a performer?
It was, in theater, I didn't really get along with all the theater kids because I felt like they were very serious and I always wanted to make fun of something. So it was when I left school and got to Second City that I really felt like I was surrounded by a community of people that were storytellers and funny and goofy. And that really flipped it for me. That was where kind of my identity shift happened. Like I got to be a performer for a career path rather than an aspiring performer under the radar.
And did after with Second City, is that when you were like, I'm going to go all in and this is what I want to do with my life?
Yep. Yep. Second City was where I was like, I'm creating this as a business. It was when I was 21 and I went and opened up a bank account for myself as a business, which I still use today.
An LLC?
Yep.
Wow. And then, so what did you do from there? Just kind of give us a high level overview where your career went.
It was, early stages of Second City. I was focused on improv, obviously, sketch shows. I started trying to direct and realized that that was a really challenging process directing for theater. So I put on a review, directed it, and then I was like, maybe I'm just a performer, but I still think I have the urge to be a leader in this space in some capacity. Then I started stand up in 2010 and moved to LA in 2011. And when I got to LA, that's when I really took it seriously. I was like, okay, how do I want to make this more of a full-time business? So I started my first production company from out there and then my second production company. And that's where I realized producing was more of my wheelhouse. Not that I wouldn't direct maybe someday in the future, but I've definitely fell into more of the taking the reins and, producing of many, many projects.
Where did I feel like that has just a lot of insight and self-awareness and big picture thinking if you're drawn to entertainment and performance, and then you have the foresight to think about maybe I should start a production company and maybe I should start producing. And it seems as though you were very entrepreneurial in your mindset around entertainment.
Yes. And I don't really know where that came from. I had no business background. I think it just came from the need for an early on understanding that nobody was just going to hand something to me. And to be honest, when I got to LA, I did not love the auditioning process. Like, I love the performance process, but the kind of cattle call auditioning process was really taxing. And in those days, you had to take your CDs and your hard print headshots with you everywhere and drive to multiple different places a day to audition. And I was like, okay, I get the need for this to get my face out there, but also can I do that in some other ways? So that's why I was like, if I have a production company, I can create more opportunities for other people too. And it was in the days of the new media contracts when they were just starting. So we became a production company that was able to get a lot of people their SAG cards, which was really cool.
I don't know what you mean by that. What was the term you just used?
New media.
Yeah. What, tell me about that.
New media was and still is a pretty big loophole in paying performers. So as a production company, if something is new media, it basically doesn't have to follow the strict SAG guidelines. So as a young production company without much of a budget, because it was like literally me and my partner's money, which wasn't much, we could put out a listing and tell people that we were deferred payment or low pay, and we could get them a part of the project in exchange for them knowing they were going to be able to get a SAG card, which skips like years and years of thankless work as extras to try to get your vouchers. So we got a lot of people their SAG cards. You'd have to go through a rigorous SAG process with your company when you were submitting stuff. But we put a lot of things in festivals. People would come in, we would give them, a 3-hour window to do their shoot. And then a week later, they'd be getting their SAG number and they'd be like, holy crap, I can't believe this is happening. Now,
So it
new
made them
media.
SAG eligible or
Mm-hmm.
immediately
Yep.
eligible? Okay. So the
Eligible.
new media law, you could create a production like a short film or whatever. And if you get accepted as this new media thing, then folks who worked on your project, even though you weren't a SAG project, they could still be SAG eligible.
Yeah, you'd have to put them
That's
through the
wild.
SAG. Yep. And it was a lot of paperwork, but the cool thing about it was, usually you'd have to go get like, I think it was 3 SAG vouchers, usually from
Yeah.
doing extra work. And oftentimes you wouldn't even get the voucher if you were doing
Right.
background. So you'd have to have like some sort of, I didn't do any background, but I think it was like you had to get some sort of accidental speaking role or on camera role in order to get a voucher so they could like pass you through the SAG. It's very restrict. They're very on top of everything with SAG-AFTRA. So I don't know if that loophole still exists in the same way, but the new media is what they were fighting in the negotiations, because some streamers are able to pay you really, really under what SAG minimums are because of, yeah. So, but it's good for young creators who want to be able to have people come onto their projects and can't afford those budgets. So it's a double-edged sword.
Did you just do research and learn about this? Were you just hanging around entrepreneurial type people? Because I know quite a bit of people who are pursuing entertainment and so forth, and they don't necessarily have this bent. It's not right or wrong to think in this way or whatever. I'm just curious, like, your mindset with that, because in the same sense, you're still performing, you're still going into the craft. And that's one of the, what I wanted to talk to you about is kind of having the entrepreneurial hat and the creative hat, because a lot of times people will say like, hey, if you want your startup or your business to work, you got to go all in. And if you want to be a performer, you've got to go all in. And I'm fascinated with folks like you who understand the creative side to business and the business side to the creative.
Yeah. To me, they've always just gelled completely. I would hang around as many leader type people as I could. It wasn't always an option. But in Los Angeles, you're around a lot of doers and hustlers. And instead of when I would meet somebody, if I was in a room around somebody that I like maybe normally wouldn't be around, and struck up a conversation with them and found out that they were, high up on the totem pole in some capacity, instead of asking them what they could do for me, I would ask them questions about how they got there. I was never trying to skate the system. I was always trying to soak in as much as I could and learn from people.
Yeah.
And I ended up maintaining a lot of really important friendships because of that, because I never was coming into stuff trying to get a piece or get hired or anything like that. I also, one of my best friends, she lives in New York now, but she was between LA and New York at the time. She's a top tier producer, but for editorial magazines, huge companies like Target and Apple. And I would PA for her so I could learn how to operate behind the scenes and what production really meant. And that being a good producer is just making things seamless for people. She's like top tier. And it's very different than producing on set, but not really. It's just different types of paperwork you've got to do. And then the first movie I was hired for, it was a small part. And I asked if I could stay on the rest of the film as a producer, like an associate producer credit for free. And they let me. So I learned a lot there. And that director ended up becoming such good friends with me that we were texting yesterday, and he directed my last special, and he's working on a ton of TV shows right now. So you just never know what just offering your time to be around people and like learn from them, watch them do it, will do in the future.
What are some of the most important takeaways from learning from these people? You mentioned the leaders in LA, you're building relationships with producers, directors, and so forth. What are some of those like time-saving, game-changer pieces of advice that they give you, or maybe you observed by being around them?
Time saving is a rough one because some projects, just take years to, no matter who you are. But what I really did learn and what really resonated with me was that your community is going to have your back. Make sure you surround yourself with people that are just working as hard as you and have the same types of passions as you. Because I've seen it time and time again where something didn't work out or a project didn't go. And then 5 years later or 6 years later, you're still at the top of the mind for somebody who's doing something now. It really has nothing to do with your skill set. And I hate to say that.
That's true. No, I believe it.
If you're willing to learn and you're willing to ask questions and you're good to people and you work well with people, it'll all work out. Like I've never seen it not work out for somebody if those pieces were in play.
It seems as though you have a gift for people and relationships and so forth. I heard in another interview you mentioned that you keep relationships, you keep friendships, you've still friends with people from elementary, middle school, and high school, and all of that.
Mm-hmm.
And I have one of my best pals. He keeps in touch with everybody, and I have no idea how he does it. He talks to everybody all the time and still runs a huge business and multiple employees and all that. And I'm always fascinated with folks like y'all because I'm thinking, okay, Natasha she's touring. She has her own material that she has to work on. She's on social media. She has a startup. You're in great shape. You take care of yourself physically. And also you're still keeping in touch with kids from elementary school.
Yep.
So I'm like, what the hell? Is it something that is just top of mind that you think about it and you stay constantly in communication with people, or do you have a system? Like for folks like me who want to be better at networking and collaboration and relationships and so forth. I know this sounds horrible, but it's honest. I don't think about it, and my schedule is so time blocked that I literally have to time block communication with people, which is humiliating. But
no,
it's true.
It's not. I mean, my schedule's completely time blocked too. I, however, this is exactly what my new newsletter is about. It's launching probably tomorrow. I have always been such a hustler. And over the years, I've had to, especially since the pandemic, because it was a forced chill out time, I was like, I have to learn how to stress myself out less about all that I put on my plate, because I'm aware I get more done in a day than most people do in a week or two. But doesn't mean I have to put that pressure on myself every day. If somebody comes, I have two rules when it comes to keeping in touch with people. Number one, if somebody I know that I have had a relationship with of any kind comes up in any sort of conversation, and generally it's positive. I mean, I'm not in rooms where people are talking smack about each other.
Right.
I immediately message them. And it's something that me and my boyfriend bonded off of when we first met. But I was like, somebody's talking good shit about somebody, I like to let them know because it might change the course of their day. They might be having a bad day. So I always let somebody know if they've come up, and number two, if they just come to mind, I'll just be like, hey, I thought of you today, just checking in. Cause you're thinking, I don't know, what is it? 60,000 thoughts in an hour. Maybe that's too many. Maybe that's too high, but I might have the stats mixed up. But if somebody comes to mind, I'm like, well, there must be a reason. And if not, it's okay to just check in. What does it take me 2 seconds to text them?
Right.
I'm notorious for not texting back very quickly, but I might text
That's
you.
my problem. They're like, how are you? And it's like 3 months later. I know. Great.
I'm like, I know if something I need to text and get into a conversation. Otherwise, some things are just kind of rhetorical, and I'm like, I'll get back to it, and that'll add up. But I grew up in Wisconsin, and I was really lucky because I grew up around such cool people. We had just such a bond in my high school, which is rare. Like I would watch the movies come out where there were the jocks and the bitchy girls and, the choir kids, and like they were all really segregated. And I would be really confused. I was like, whose schools are like that? It didn't make any sense
was
to
it
me.
A small school?
Yeah, I think our graduating class had just under 400. We weren't super small.
Okay.
Stoughton, Wisconsin. It was a pretty decent sized, mid-sized town, but we all just intermingled. Like the different groups that we had, everybody could show up at the same party and nobody was like, why are they here? It was it was really inclusive, and I meandered between a lot of different groups. So I didn't really consider myself like in one. I had my close girlfriends, and then, I had some choir kids I hung out with. I had, my volleyball girls I hung out with, and we all would, hang together. And those relationships really shaped my life. We were always funny, always finding ways to entertain ourselves. It's like where the whole lifeblood of what I do sprung from. Because I don't feel like I got into comedy because of anything traumatic in my childhood. It was because I just really enjoyed entertaining and togetherness and like community, honestly.
Yeah.
Something traumatic did make me start stand up, but the early stuff, the early parts of my comedy career came from my upbringing.
Wow. So you knew you were funny, you knew you liked making people laugh and stuff. Something happened in your life where you decide to get up on stage to show it. I'm curious why, I guess, that you had to go to the next level
Mm-hmm.
because something, if that makes sense, like
Mm-hmm.
what was it about that?
Well, I made the choice to go to Second City because some of my teachers were just like, you'd be really great at improv. And I left school after 2 years. And so moved to Chicago on my own. And in Second City, there was a lot of improv shows that ASCAT is kind of designed like this. It was monologuist shows. So a monologuist would come up, take a suggestion from the audience, and rattle off a story off the top of their head. And then the
Oh, wow.
improv would come from that. So I was brought in as monologuist a lot. And I was young, but I was like, I got a lot of stories. And then I ended up in this really, really traumatic relationship, and stories for another time. But
Sure.
because I didn't want to be home, I finally was like, maybe I'll try stand up. And that was in 2010. And so I started just getting out of the house and going to mics. And it was this whole new world that unfolded for me outside of the improv and sketch community.
And you liked it better?
Yeah. I mean, I liked it better because you didn't have a fallback plan. Like if your show was bad for improv, you could kind of blame the collective. Not that anybody was looking for blame,
Sure, sure, sure.
but in your head, you'd be like, oh, we just weren't in our rhythm, or, we weren't yes-anding, or whatever it was. But with stand up, you didn't have that option. If it went poorly, it was your fault, and I liked that because it forced you to have to really prepare in a different way. Improv, you didn't have to prepare. I could come hungover to class and we could just goof
Yeah,
off
yeah, yeah.
for an hour. I was really young. So sometimes I would come to class and I'd be like, I'm still in the clothes I was in last night. I mean, it was Saturday morning class. So I was at Second City at like 10 a.m. on Saturdays. But, stand up, you couldn't do that. You had to write. You had to, the improv skill set really helped. So you could deal with things that maybe weren't ideal. But yeah, it was all on you. And I thought it was cool.
All on you. You'd said somewhere else about really being intentional with your decisions of what moved the needle in your career. And I think you were talking about it within context of deciding, eventually left LA and moved back to Chicago or
Mm-hmm.
Wisconsin?
Chicago, yeah.
Chicago. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I made a note on that because as you become more and more serious about whatever endeavor, I think that at the beginning it's just like, hey, traction, anything, everything, I'll say
Mm-hmm.
yes, and opportunities. And then after a while, there's so much on the table that you could do. You know what I
Mm-hmm.
mean? Like, I could produce this over here, or I could go all in and make more specials, or I could, yada, 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 or there's this whatever. And figuring out the best use of your time and strategic moves, and then still kind of remaining open, living a curious life. Like for me, it's tricky. I feel like I'm trying to learn more of the art of no
Yep.
than
Yeah.
than yes right now in
Yep.
this season of my life. And I'm just curious your perception on that because you have a lot on the table and a lot of different directions that you can constantly go. Like, how do you decide what is the best use of your time right now to elevate your career?
I've said this in like maybe one other conversation or so, but I really view my trajectory as a highway. You know, I'm not changing speed. I just can change lanes really easily. And my brain works well that way. You know, some people that don't understand that you can have multiple career paths, just it doesn't make sense for them. They're like, "Are you a full-time comedian?" I'm like, "Yes, I have been for a long time, but your idea of full-time, like what do you mean by that?" Like, I'm my own brand, so I exist full-time. So yeah, I guess, but everything I do is full-time. Like, I don't know what you mean by that. I don't think like that, you know? And there's so many other layers to how you can make money. You know, I used to be a yes woman too, where I would, you know, do early in your career. I think it's important kind of to be a yes person. You should say yes to the podcast. You should say yes to the filming for 3 days that only pays $100. You should say yes to that. Meet as many people as you can. You know, living in LA, that was really important. That was an important step in my career because I just put myself out there. I would do a lot. You know, most of my stand-up shows didn't pay well. I would drive all over the city to do them. But then you hit a turning point where you're like, thankfully this was happening for me right when the pandemic was about to hit, where I had a monthly show in Los Angeles, a monthly show in New York, a weekly show in Las Vegas. And I was just, part of that was busyness that I was masking because my relationship at that time was falling apart. And part of that was the feeling of needing to be busy. So it seemed like I was always up to something. I wasn't doing it because I wanted to seem busy, but there's a piece of that plays into that because you're like, oh, if I don't have 20 shows in the next month in LA, well, at least I have stuff in other cities. And yes, I was getting money from all these things, but I was exhausted. You know, I was running too much. And when the pandemic hit, it was kind of the first, you know, I was out of that relationship. Everything went on pause. And I was like, okay, from here on out, I have to really think what is moving the needle. You know, I don't have to say yes to every podcast now. I've got a special that's coming out. I'm building, you know, a company. I need to be smarter about what I do and value myself a little bit more. You know, make sure that the things that I work on either are moving the needle in the direction of like people that I want to be working with or are paying me my value. And if it doesn't fall into those categories, it has to be a no. And it's been work. It's been work to chill myself out in that regard. But I just am more grounded and a lot more just shows up on my doorstep to choose from because of that. You know, it was just a reframing of my thought process. And it's been 5 years of like pretty intense work on that.
Damn.
You know,
when you were doing the shows in pre-pandemic, LA, Vegas, New York, were those shows that you had put together and were producing, or did you build relationships and they invite you in?
Yeah, it was shows I was producing. Boss Comedy I was running with my girlfriend Courtney, who doesn't do stand-up anymore, but she's a brilliant actress. We started at a Comedy Store LA, and then I decided I wanted it to be bi-coastal. I started working on hotel partnerships for us. I'm really good at partnerships. And then, so we started flying to New York together, running the show out there at West Side Comedy Club. Vegas, I wanted a weekly spot that I could call my own. And LA was so condensed. You know, there was just so many shows. I cold called a hotel and I was like, I want to come and meet you guys. One of my best friends lived out there and played poker that I grew up with. So I've known him since I was 8. So he met me at the hotel. I met the GM and I pitched a show and they put me on payroll and I started flying out every month, every week to do a Monday night show in Vegas. They gave me unlimited free rooms for comics that were traveling in. I brought in some brand partners that had wanted Vegas access or wanted billboard. We had a billboard and it was Future Role Model. It was Future Role Models Live. So I branded it after my podcast. So I would record my podcast at the hotel before the show with one of the comics and then do the show and then release the podcast the next day. It was crazy. It was a lot.
Damn.
Yeah. Damn. It was wild.
Do you identify as an entrepreneurial creative?
Yes.
Or a creative entrepreneur?
Well, I don't really know which one I'd put first. I usually say creative entrepreneur just because I feel like I am a creative first. But me and my now co-founder talk about this all the time because we're both artists at heart. So we focus on building from an artist mindset, not from the bro tech culture mindset. And it's been really freeing. You know, we're making decisions of how we want to operate and move in the world, not because we want to grind ourselves to the bone.
Yeah.
I think everything good takes hustle, but I don't think everything takes don't ever sleep, don't eat right, don't take care of yourself levels of hustle. That is not something to be praised, you know? And the creative in us knows that at the core, we can't be our best selves or think about things in a new way or build properly if we're overly foundering ourselves, you know? I don't know how else to say that, but I think there's a common misconception of what it takes to build something great. And if you're a good leader and you're actionable, you can build anything. It doesn't have to be that way.
Yeah.
You know?
There's a big kind of turning point in your story that I want us to just share, just to catch folks up a little bit before I ask my next few questions, just because it'll provide some context. But you started a startup in the middle of all this. So you're busting your ass. You're busting your ass. Pandemic comes, series of events happen. You start a business, high level. When people hear this, they're going to want to me to dig in a little bit more, but I'll make sure I include in the show notes some previous interviews you've done with like the full story. But what happened over the pandemic with you?
So, okay, the pandemic year was a crazy one. So January 2020, broke up with my ex-fiance of 9 years. We'd been in each other's lives for 14. I was devastated, even though I knew it was coming for a long time, because I had shot my special the June before on our canceled wedding day. So my first special is called I Was Supposed to Get Married Today. So I had flipped that room and shot a special on a really difficult day. I knew we weren't going to recover from that, but we kind of tried. Then
so that was 2019.
2019 shot the special
on your wedding day. Your friend's family come.
Yeah.
That's so bad.
Well, they were already, my closest friends, my best friend, my family, they were all like planning, you know, they had all the save the dates. Yeah. So I did send out the ticket links to everybody instead of save the dates. And then I opened it up to people from my hometown and my high school and put it in the news in Madison because Madison's close to my hometown and sold it out. And I sold it out to the dollar of what it cost to produce.
Wow.
Like it was like a couple cents off. It was crazy.
Jesus. Wow.
So yeah, serendipity at its finest. And my now boyfriend actually hosted that special and he was in a different relationship at the time. Yeah. We had no intention of ever dating. So he was
God, girl, you need a movie about this.
Seriously.
I swear, if you're not working on that.
You don't even know. So this gets even more crazy. So I break up with my ex, my best friend who lived in Chicago. He and I had become close when I was 21 and moved here. And I was working at one of the bars that he would go to. He's 10 years older than me. He was in Palm Springs. And so I call him and I'm like, this just happened and I'm devastated. He's like, I'm in Palm Springs, drive out. And so I drove up and stayed with him and some friends at this huge house in Palm Springs. We were sitting in the pool, just having a Bloody Mary. And I was like, I have this concept for a breakup registry. It's my friend Matthew. And I was like, I want to build this. I think it'd be really fun and inspiring and like remind people that they can like restart their lives. He's like, I think that's brilliant, Tosh. You got to do it. Cut to 2 months later, pandemic hits. And I'm like, God, I'm stuck at home with my family for 4 months. I was in between touring and I just went to my family's in Wisconsin with my luggage from New York and stayed there because I didn't really have anything to return to. I had just moved my things into storage from my ex. And then this fan of mine from NBC, he's an exec, was watching my stuff on Zoom. And he basically, we had known each other through the yoga community. Him and his wife gifted me their home in Los Angeles because of my story. So I got to leave the pandemic with my parents and move to this house in LA for 7 months to take care of the house while they were away. Beautiful home in the hills. This man is now like one of my best friends, and I go out and stay at the house all the time. That was what made it easy for me to leave LA. So he gave me his home with an electric car in it. So I had a car, a house, and no bills. So that's when I was like, I'm going to build this thing. So I took my savings and built the first rendition of my breakup registry. Went through a lot of ups and downs with that, obviously coinciding with comedy restarting in 2021. But my special came out in 2021, so I was able to launch with that. And it generated a lot of buzz. But about a year and 2 months ago, I met my co-founder and brought her on. It's pretty uncommon to bring somebody on like 2.5 years after you're into a project, but I was drowning by myself and I needed more creative vision besides my own. And she lives in San Francisco and has worked in tech. Like she works at Meta. She's very smart. So I was lucky to get her. And around that same time, Matthew, who had originally told me to invest in this as a project, he invested in the company. And then in December, Matthew passed away unexpectedly. So we
This
had
past December?
Yeah, my best friend.
Oh my God,
yeah.
I'm so sorry.
It was a brutal, I took the whole month of January off of comedy. So we had already, this is crazy though, because we had already been working to relaunch the platform to help people through grief and loss and tragedies of other kinds besides just breakups and divorces. And lo and behold, while we're preparing for this whole new media sector of our relaunch, he passes away. So I'm like in the middle of relaunch, like experiencing horrible grief. I mean, I'm not crying about, I've already cried everything out, but so it's just like this whole full circle. Like I'm thankful that he was in my hip pocket, like inspiring me to do this, because I don't know if I would have really done it. He gave us an influx of cash right when I needed it. And I'm glad that she came in when she did, because otherwise, like I would have had nobody in December. So yeah, it's been like such a journey. And this Matthew came out to see me perform at Edinburgh Fringe last year with some friends, and like it was just really crazy. So this whole like interesting timeline of just like gifts of human beings, kind of coming back to the friendship thing. Like these people that believe in you along the way, that's really what made launching this thing possible, and what makes me want to do more with it than just have like an app. It's more community driven, and that really is the core of what's driven everything that I do, is just these amazing communities and connections and support systems from friends that keep you going, Sorry, that was a lot.
No, it's wild. I told you that yesterday. I spent several hours listening to previous interviews that you've done. So I've heard this story in so many different iterations and you telling it in different ways. But these were a year or two ago that you recorded it, and I didn't know that happened to your friend. I'm so sorry.
Thank you.
It's what's wild about this. And I told you this yesterday when I sent you a voicemail. I said, here's the direction I'm thinking. And then it always goes somewhere else. And what's so crazy about this is I wanted to talk to you about kind of the entrepreneurial side to building a creative career and how you've invested your time in learning how to build a startup, which is not easy.
Yeah.
While still performing and honing your craft there. And I wanted to dig into kind of the weeds of that, but what has been coming up over and over and over again through this conversation is just the importance of relationships and your network, and that you're not a solo show, that you've been able to do, because everything that you've mentioned has come back to a relationship that you've had.
Yeah.
And, you being a good steward, you being faithful to the relationships that you've had. Moving forward from here, what is your vision? How are you making decisions right now? Because again, you could go all in on one lane, and you have a lot on your plate.
Yeah.
A lot, not just tactically, but also too emotionally, spiritually.
Yeah.
I know you're heavily involved in your own personal growth and quiet time and energy
Mm-hmm.
and so forth. So when you have things that come across your desk now, what is the filter you are using and the direction you're focused on?
This sounds really simple and silly, but something that me and my co-founder said the other day is it fun or does it move the needle?
That is not, I have that note in my phone. Does it
It's
move the
just
needle?
that basic. Does it move the
Yes.
needle towards, I may have multiple goals, but they all kind of align very nicely. And if it doesn't sound fun, if it's fun and it pays me almost nothing, but it seems like a joy to do, and it's down the street in Chicago, I'll totally do it. If it seems taxing and it's like we just decide, and I just decide based on feeling, is this good for what I'm looking to do? Does this align? The cool thing about having the kind of these two coinciding career paths is a lot of things just show up in my life as an opportunity that I wouldn't have even thought to look for. Public speaking opportunities. I hosted a workshop last year for a VC company in essentially performance and pitching that I wrote like a couple days before. I just hosted a huge gala in December because they were like, "Oh, you're an entrepreneur and a comedian, there's interesting things that people now see you as when you have this two sides to the coin." And tomorrow I fly to Charlotte to headline for a VC and tech company that asked me to come out and headline one of my favorite clubs on their behalf. So I don't really find them not to mash well. I think when it comes to what comes across my desk, like every morning I just tell myself like I'm open to whatever shows up. And if I decide to do something or I decide not to do something, that's my decision. And if I decide to do it, I will do it well. If I decide not to, I won't think twice about it.
That's good.
You know?
No second guessing.
Yeah, you have to just, and that takes work too over the years. Oh, I should have done this or I should have done this differently. Well, you can't.
Yeah.
You can't. So let it go. If you decide no, that's it.
You mentioned this term, and when we were DMing each other, it says a portfolio style career, building a portfolio style career. And I wrote that down in big letters because I was like, that's interesting. Can you tell me more about that?
Well, I feel like pretty much everything that I care about working on has stemmed from some piece of my life. Like I have a TV show I wrote that we're working on about me and my grandma's relationship. My grandma's an integral part of pieces of my stand-up. She was also a person I interviewed on my podcast that people loved. A lot of the things that I've written have been about different sectors of my life or interesting people that I've met. My company is a spinoff of my podcast, but also has opened up to exploring more about, helping people and building community and creating connection. It all just kind of falls out of this same through line. Even my old podcast, I feel like everything that I choose to put my hands on is resonating with me in some way. And I think that's how any artist works. And it makes it challenging when people think, "Oh, are you just focused on this one thing?" And I'm like, well, I am the one thing. I am at the center of all these things. So if I like a bunch of things, it doesn't mean I have to go do them all professionally, but it doesn't mean that I can't be a public speaker and a comedian and an entrepreneur and be on the board of multiple startups because I have this insight. This to me is a portfolio career. I do content. Sometimes I do partnerships. It doesn't pin you into one thing. It's like I have this envelope of a few things that align with me. And at any point, one of them could be pulled out, and somebody could offer me something in that lane. And I'll be like, that sounds like something I want to do with my Thursday next week. Great. And it's like a continual challenge that keeps my brain firing on all cylinders. I don't think anything hinders the other. They only help.
Amen. Amen. You did not have to do this. You didn't have to say yes. Take some of your time to sit with me and let me drill you with a whole bunch of questions. I am so glad that we're connected now. I love,
Me too.
I told you before, what you've done is really cool. I think who you are is even cooler. I really encourage folks to listen. I'll put some more interviews that you've done down in the show notes and just hear more about your story, your approach to your life. But before our last question, what would you like to direct our folks to? Is there something you're really excited about, a project or some way that we could support you?
I mean, I have a lot that I'm going to be rolling out soon. I think
The curse of
I know
what we do.
the best way to keep in touch with what I'm up to would be number one, Instagram, which is at NPH Comedy, my initials. And number two, my new newsletter, which is coming out called The Hustle and Chill. That is what my value center. It is not just my tour dates. It's going to be thoughts on the hustle side of life, thoughts on things I'm doing to, chill myself out and center myself, and insider information from behind the scenes of working in comedy, what it's like to work with clubs, what's going on in entertainment. It's going to be everything that happens in my brain on paper. I think it'll be a really interesting read for people, whether they're pursuing comedy or were in entertainment or just interested in feeling better,
Yeah.
So
yeah. That'll be linked up in the show notes. Last question. What is something in your life that you are deeply questioning right now?
Ooh.
People always give me that exact same look. They go, ooh.
Honestly, the biggest thing is where I want to live. I loved living in Los Angeles. I love living in Chicago. I love that I can go back and forth very seamlessly, but I've also felt like I could live in New York, and it's been on Atlanta. I'm up for a new potential series out there. So maybe. So I don't know. I mean, I love it here, but I could live in a lot of places, and I have friends in a lot of big cities. Yeah. So it's hard to know where I really want to situate, which is weird to say at 40, but I just feel like so.
I don't think it's weird at all. I don't know. I just felt like I had a divine intervention from the Lord, and he said Atlanta. I don't know. It just dropped here. I have no idea why, but I just heard Atlanta. So maybe I just helped you.
Yeah, maybe.
All right, Natasha, it was awesome. Thanks for your time today.
Thank you so much. This was great.